Now, you might think that, oh, well, does that mean that Ethereum has outperformed Bitcoin, since late 2021? And actually, that's not true. I would still say, there is certainly a chance here that it just kind of fades back down. So my view on Ethereum is that it likely fades going into the back half of the year. We did provide an update to Ethereum not too long ago, but in that video, we mostly spoke about the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, which to me is a much more important metric to look at, right? And it was like a 30-minute video. We talked about how likely that this was just a fake out and nothing more than a lower high, and how that is the more relevant metric to look at. And I will stand by looking at valuations of these cryptocurrencies against Bitcoin is the best way to do so, is the best way to go about the cryptoverse, okay? So there's this idea that we've had for a long time, and that's, that we can fit a logarithmic regression band to Ethereum's price data, but to choose that data based on what we think is considered to be quote unquote non-bubble data. So it is somewhat discretionary as to what someone might deem to be, in fact, non-bubble data. For instance, there will be a lot of people, and I'm not saying they're wrong, right? There will be a lot of people that would argue that this here should be included in this logarithmic regression trendline fit. And if you did that, of course, it would shift this just subtly upwards. I think the issue that I have with that is that normally when you go from one cycle to another, you have to adjust the regression band not to the upside, but to the downside. Normally, you will see that we actually dropped below it this cycle. Now, you might think that, oh, well, does that mean that Ethereum has outperformed Bitcoin, since late 2021? And actually, that's not true. Bitcoin has actually held its value better than Ethereum from the high to the low. Okay, so Ethereum went down about 82%. Bitcoin went down about 77%. Okay, so from that perspective, even though Bitcoin went below its regression band, Ethereum actually dropped more. And so at this point, and note that I probably should update this regression band relatively soon, basically because there was this deviation outside of it. Of course, we have had deviations outside of it before, and I haven't updated it yet. But normally, I wouldn't expect to update a regression band because it outperformed. It's more so because it would underperform. Okay. At this point, I cannot yet be compelled to change my view. The Ethereum Bitcoin valuation has continued to play out how we thought that it would. And given that we know that the pre-halving years wreck both the bulls and the bears, right? We wreck both sides in the pre-halving years. We just spent January, February, March, and April wrecking the bears. May, we wrecked the bulls. June, it remains to be seen, but I would still argue there's plenty of months throughout the rest of this year where we can wreck the bulls. Probably a couple where we wreck the bears as well, just to get it in line about 6 and 6 or so. But at this point, I still think that because Bitcoin has to wreck both sides before the year is out, and because the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is what I would consider to be a downtrend, right? Just putting in lower highs for a long time, that there is still a very high risk here of us going back to the fair value logarithmic regression trendline. Now, an interesting development is that the fair value, according to this fit to non-bubble data, of Ethereum is at 875, but the prior low was actually at 880. So they're essentially the same. If Ethereum went back down to its prior low, that would get it back home. Now, if we were to dump now, it would actually be, if we were to dump to the what I've called home before, right? It would actually correspond to the prior low. That doesn't mean that you can't go below that level. As you can see, we did go entirely below the entire regression band back in March of 2020. And in fact, it went about 34% below the regression band during that drop. If we were to have another drop similar to that, like 34% below this level, that would correspond down to about a $400 Ethereum, which is why I've thrown that number out there in the past as a potential outcome in sort of like a worst case scenario environment or something, or like around that level, plus or minus $100, right? It could be a little bit higher, could be lower, right? But that would be sort of a worst case outcome that I would consider. Right now, Ethereum is coming in right around $1,700, so we are still quite a bit away from entering into the regression band, right? The Ethereum valuation would need to drop about 24% or so for us to just get back down to the fair value logarithmic regression trend line. But normally, what you would expect, right? We don't really have a ton of data points, but we saw this in 2019 where it rallied for half the year and then it sort of faded, after that. And if we were to look at it for Bitcoin, you'll remember that in 2019, Bitcoin had a positive year, whereas Ethereum did not. And Ethereum actually closed the year below its yearly open. Now, this is what it looks like for 2023 so far. The yearly open for Ethereum, if you're curious, if we were to go figure out what exactly the yearly open was, it was 1195. So if it wants to follow the ghost of 2019, then that means that Ethereum could in fact close the year below 1195. Which, I mean, I know that sounds like a big drop, but it's actually not that large of a drop from the current valuations. I mean, we're currently already at around 1700, and so to get back to that level, you're talking about a 30% drop. I mean, it can happen, right? I mean, it certainly can happen. You can actually see that in 2019, we came up to the top of this gray band, which is kind of the same spot we just went to during this pre-halving year as well for Bitcoin. Do note, though, that after it tagged that in 2019 in July, June, July, we then faded it basically until early the next year. So I would still say, there is certainly a chance here that it just kind of fades back down into the fair value logarithmic regression trend line. And if you look at it for Ethereum and draw it out to the next peak, but just sort of look at what happened in 2019, you can see that it came down, 2018, it came down, and then it rallied, and then it sort of faded again in the second half of the year. I think we're probably in this fade period where it doesn't mean that you're not going to have some rallies back up, right? In fact, we probably will, right? And there's no reason that you can't see Bitcoin and Ethereum rally 5 to 10% occasionally, right? That would actually be fairly normal and expected. But arguably, we have just been putting in lower highs, since about mid-April, okay? And one of the things I've said before as well with regards to, to Bitcoin is that we need to see the dominance get back to around that 60% level. One way for it to do that is for in a downtrend, which at least it is in right now. I mean, market conditions can change, but it's been in a downtrend since mid-April. These rallies have a way of shaking off the altcoin market on their Bitcoin pairs and also Ethereum. And you can see that's playing out right now, again, right? I mean, like Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation is down below 0.065, even though Bitcoin is up. Ethereum does tend to fade when Bitcoin is below its 20-week SMA. And again, right now, Bitcoin is only just below it. So my view on Ethereum is that it likely fades going into the back half of the year. We've talked about this many, many times. Okay, this should not be news to anyone. And that ideally, it would eventually return home before we actually gear up for a real bull market to potentially take us to new highs. I only say that because this is what we've seen in the past. Doesn't mean that it has to happen. But, back in 2019, when we were up here, I didn't think we were going to go all the way back down here. And we did. And it was, in fact, a 75% correction. Now, a 75% correction from this level for Ethereum would actually get it down to around $500. It doesn't have to be that. I mean, again, if you look at this initial drop, it was 95, so it was 95 and then 75. This one was about 80, 82. So perhaps if it does fade in the second half of the year and our thesis is correct, maybe it only fades 60% and gets you down to 840, or maybe it's like 65% and gets you down to 739, or maybe it's 70% and gets you down to 622.